Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And first, just a quick announcement to remind you that it really is time to get registered for the Diet and Lifestyle Intervention course, which starts in June. This is the one taught by me and John McDougall and Caldwell Esselstyn and Alan Goldhammer and Dr. Ralph Moss and Larry Polowski, who talks about vaccines, and we cover mental health. It's a phenomenal program. I'm sure it will change your life. And we have limited spaces. I mean, we just can't take 100 people in this program. So if you're thinking you want to do it, this would be about a really good time to get your application in. All right, so I have an issue I want to talk about. It gets a lot of attention these days, and I guess I'll just keep talking about it until we get some traction with it, but it has to do with flu vaccines. And I'll just start by saying medical doctors are some of the brightest people in the country. I don't think we're going to get a lot of people to say that that's not true. But they sometimes don't demonstrate the willingness to engage in critical thinking and to leave behind ideas that are simply not good or wrong and harmful. And I always kind of contrast this with business. You know, in any other business but healthcare, if you did stuff that didn't work and harmed people, or people had to be coerced into buying it, you couldn't stay in business. Businesses have to adapt to the marketplace, and healthcare just doesn't. And I think that's kind of bizarre when you think about it. Not so in medicine. Tests, vaccines, drugs, surgeries that are at best not helpful and sometimes harmful they just don't continue to be available. They're strongly promoted and recommended, and some mandated. Some people are coerced into participation, which is the case with healthcare workers and flu shots. No matter what the evidence shows in terms of the number of people who benefit this year, the CDC says less than 1% are helped with the flu vaccine. The CDC and other medical authorities continue to insist that it's advisable, and for healthcare workers, it's mandatory. But there are a few voices of reason that are starting to get some attention. Daniel O'Rourke is a physician who posted an editorial recently in which he states, quote, that mandatory vaccination programs for healthcare workers are rapidly sweeping the nation is further evidence of a society in serious decline. He refers to the yearly, quote, influenza hysteria and the absurdity known as mandatory vaccination of healthcare workers. O'Rourke qualifies his statements by saying he doesn't want to discourage people from getting vaccines voluntarily, as long as there's informed consent. I've been talking about that for a long time, and that his comments should not be taken as an anti-vaccine screed. Rather, O'Rourke states that until recently it's been considered absurd to mandate medical treatments of any type for people who are mentally competent. Now, for minors and for those who were incompetent, consent would be given by parents or those with legal power of attorney. The reason, according to O'Rourke, is that all medical treatments, including vaccines, subject people to varying degrees of risk, and they should therefore have a say in whether or not they engage in them. O'Rourke correctly points out that while rare, flu vaccines have resulted in death and disability for conditions like Guillain-Barré syndrome, and that mandatory vaccine programs have been stopped previously as a result of this type of thing. He lists some other issues that I think are significant. Influenza is often wrongly confused with influenza-like illness, which can result from 200 viruses in addition to influenza A and B. It's impossible to distinguish between the two based on symptoms, but the reality is only about 1% of flu cases annually are of the serious variety. The rest of them, I wouldn't say we don't want to be concerned about them, but they're really not life-threatening or health-threatening. Death from flu is in fact rare, between 3,000 and 49,000 cases annually, and death usually occurs in very ill and very old people, 90% of whom have serious medical problems in addition to contracting the flu. Now, I would add that it's difficult to attribute these deaths to flu alone, because these people are suffering from so many other conditions. The death rate from all other causes, by comparison, is 2.4 million a year. Now, my take on this is a good number of these 2.4 million deaths are from coronary artery disease. So what would happen if I proposed a mandatory plant-based diet for the whole population based on this? In terms of the number of people affected, I'd be on more solid ground and there aren't any negative side effects. But the outrage would be incredible, and I can just predict what people would start saying. I live in America. I should be able to eat cheeseburgers whenever I want to. The government has no business insisting that I eat beans and rice for dinner. Well, I have a lot of passion for teaching people about plant-based nutrition, but I really have to agree. The government and employers have no business mandating diets for people. I think it's inappropriate. Well, back to the flu vaccine thing, our work correctly reports that most flu vaccine research is of poor quality and prone to bias. And that was the conclusion reached by the Cochrane collaboration. I reported on that. See other articles in the Health Briefs online library. Cochrane, in fact, says that flu vaccines are useless for all populations. Higher quality studies have concluded that 100 people need to be vaccinated in order to prevent just one case of the flu, and there's no evidence that the vaccine prevents the spread of flu, which means that mandatory vaccination for healthcare workers is arbitrary and provides no benefit either. Patients don't get flu from asymptomatic healthcare workers, regardless of whether or not they've been vaccinated, unless they don't wash their hands or engage in the right sanitary, proper hygiene practices. Our work further states that masks don't protect patients from getting acute respiratory illnesses either. As with other vaccinations, the CDC and other advocates often have conflicts of interest and misrepresent data in order to make their case. To add to the mess, and I think this is appalling, hospitals are financially incentivized based on the numbers of healthcare workers they get vaccinated. Flu vaccines have just turned into another billion-dollar industry that is intent on protecting itself at almost any cost, and that includes the cost to public health, and it affects you and I very much. O'Rourke concludes his editorial by stating that if healthcare workers can be forced to take medical treatments without consent, eventually the entire population can be subjected to similar mandates. And people say, no, that can't happen. But if you take a look at policies ranging from taxation to education and the history of how they developed, this is not a very far-fetched idea. O'Rourke is a medical doctor, a cardiologist at a hospital, makes his comments a little harder to ignore. And he's one of a growing group of medical professionals who are starting to speak out about vaccination issues. The response from advocates is to marginalize these people. They're taunted, discredited, accused of not being concerned about public health and of being a danger to society. And interestingly enough, that's what a lot of people said about me when I started the Wellness Forum. And then things changed. This diet began to get some recognition, more science behind it. Forks Over Knives came out. Bill Clinton and other public figures have stated that they've adopted the diet. And I've been invited to write books and appear on TV shows. And as it turns out, I was right. And I am confident that the brave people who are willing to speak out about vaccinations in a responsible manner will be proven right too. So this is an issue that is gaining, more and more people want to talk about it, more and more people are frustrated by it, and I guess we'll just keep talking about it until we get enough people to just say no, that we force the system to reform. I do think that's the best way to approach this. So that's all for today. Have a wonderful week and weekend, and I'll be back to you next Tuesday.